Hello everyone, welcome to the Learn Python series. This is part 1 of the Learn Python series. Make sure that you have Python downloaded so you can follow along. If you are unable to download Python on your computer, you can use Program.is online Python interpreter, which is linked in the description below, or other websites applications that you are able to program with Python on. All right, let's get started. Here's today's video's lesson overview. We are going to first go over some of the basic data types in Python, such as integers, strings, floating point, and Booleans. We'll then go over the print function, and finally we'll go over about variables. All right, so today some of the basic data types that we will be going over in Python will be strings, Booleans, and numerical data types such as integers and floating points. As shown in the image to the right, there are also other types of Python data types that we'll not be going over in this video, but in future videos, such as complex numbers, lists, tuples, sets, and dictionaries. All right, the first data type we'll be going over will be strings. Strings are literals that are specified with single or double quotes. Hello with double quotes is the same thing as hello with single quotes. Anything that you put quotations around, either single quote or double quotes, are considered a string. Strings are denoted as str. Some examples of strings are listed below. They could be words like circle. They could be simply random letters together. Could be characters like hashtag, exclamation mark, question mark, dollar sign. They could also simply just be numbers like 1, 2, 3. But strings, in order for it to be a string, there has to be a quotation mark around it, because if it doesn't have a quotation mark around it, it's not really a string. All right, let's go over some examples of strings. Remember, strings need to have quotation marks, either double quotation, or they can have single quotation marks. All right, strings could be letters. They could be random letters. That's a string because there's quotations around it. It could be words, like let's say word, a string. Hello is a string. Python is a string. It can also just be, you can also make numbers as strings, like 1, 2, 3, 9, 0, 7, or you also have like 3, 5, 6, 7. Those are all strings. You can also have random characters as strings, like that's a string. That's a string. And that's a string. So those are all examples of strings. They could be letters, they could be random letters, they could be words, they could be characters, they could be numbers, as long as they have a quotation around it, single or double quotations, it will be a string. All right, here are some more string applications that you are able to do with strings. I will go more in depth with these separate applications in future videos, but I just want to give you an overview of what strings can do, what you can do with strings in Python. You're able to combine strings together with the addition sign, like hello, the string hello plus the string world, combined with the addition sign will give you hello world. You can return a range of characters by using the slice syntax. You can make strings uppercase or lowercase using the uppercase and lowercase functions. Find the length of strings using the len function, or repeat strings, repetition using multiplication sign. as shown in the final example where yeet multiplied by 5 will print yeet 5 times. All right, let's move on to integers now. Integers are whole numbers, both positive or negative, without decimals of unlimited length. It's important to note that integers cannot have any decimal points. It's just purely a number with no decimal points, whole numbers. This is a huge difference between integers and floating point numbers. So their integers are denoted as int. Some examples of integers include 1, -7, 10. All right, other examples of integers include, and remember, integers will not have any quotation marks around it, double or single. They will not have quotation marks because if you put a quotation mark and you put a 1, that is considered a string. Because in the previous slide, like I said, strings have quotation marks around it. But integers will not. So integers could be any whole numbers like 1, 3, 9, 90, 88, 77. As long as there's no decimal points, and no quotations, so it's an integer. Examples of non-integers include 1 with quotation, 0.9, 5.0, 5.67, and so on. The first one's not an integer because the first one is a string, and the last 3 examples are not integers because there are decimal points, and integers may not have decimal points. They have to be whole numbers in order to be integers. All right, let's move on to floating point numbers. Floating point numbers are numbers that can be positive or negative that contain 1 or more decimals. All right, floating point numbers may contain decimals, unlike integers, which are whole numbers and cannot contain any decimals. Floating point numbers are denoted as float. Some examples of floating point numbers include 1.10, 2.0, -35.59. All right, so other examples of floating point numbers include 0.9, 5.6, 2.00, 0.0087. Anything with decimal places afterwards and with decimals, they are considered floating points. And non-floating point numbers include these. These could be non-floating points because all of these, they are integers. They're all whole numbers, so they're integers. They also will not be any strings, anything with any quotations around it, right? Even numbers with quotations around it are not floating point numbers either. Even numbers, decimals with quotations around it, like 9.086 is considered a string because there are quotation marks around it. And remember, integers and floating point numbers will not have any quotations around it. They are numerical. They do not have any quotations around it. All right, now let's talk about Booleans. Booleans are represented of 1 or 2 values. They could be true or false. You can evaluate any expression in Python and get 1 of 2 answers, true or false. For example, if you look below, 10 is greater than 9. That is true. So Python will evaluate that and they will return true because 10 is greater than 9. But if the expression is false, like 10 is equal to 9, Python will read it and it'll return false because 10 is not equal to 9. And the same for the last one. 10 is less than 9 is also false. So Python will also return false. So a lot of the time, whenever you have something like this, Python will return true or false. And in these cases, they'll either return true if the statement is true or false if the statement is false. We'll go deeper into Booleans in the future, but here's a brief overview. Booleans can either be true or false. All right, so variables. Now we'll be going over variables. Variables are containers for storing data values, okay? Variables can have short names like X, Y, Z, A, or more descriptive names like words such as age, car name, total, underscore volume. There are certain rules for variables in Python that include a variable name must start with a letter or the underscore character. Some examples include underscore start or X. So variables can only start with any letters from A through Z or an underscore. Variables cannot start with a number, so you cannot start off a variable with a 2 or any other numbers from 0 through 9. But other than that, a variable can contain alphanumerical characters and underscores, meaning it can contain letters from A through Z, numbers from 0 through 9, and it can contain an underscore as well. So here are some variable examples, both legal variable examples and illegal variable examples. As you can see, the legal variable example is my var, my underscore var, underscore my, underscore var, my var, capital my var2. They all work because they all follow the rules stated here in the previous slide. So remember, variables, they have to either start with a letter from A through Z or underscore, which is why all of these work, because the first one starts with a letter M. The second one also starts with M. Third one starts with an underscore, which is fine because variables can either start with underscores or letters, but not numbers, okay? So, and other than that, remember variables, they could be uppercase, lowercase. They can only contain letters from A through Z, uppercase, lowercase. They can contain letters, they can contain letters from A through Z and numbers from 0 through 9. And they can also contain underscores. But if you look at the illegal variable names, to my var is wrong because there's a 2. 2 is the starting. 2 cannot be at the beginning. A number cannot be at the beginning of a variable name. A variable name can only begin with either underscore or a letter. So variables can only begin with letters or underscore. Second one does not. The my dash var doesn't work because any other characters like hashtag, question mark, $, etc., including dash, doesn't work because variable names cannot have those. The only things that can be in a variable name, variables don't have to be words, like var is not a word, right? Variables can only contain letters and numbers and also underscores, but just numbers cannot be at the beginning. They can be later in the variable, but not at the beginning. And also variables have to be one thing. It cannot have any spaces in between. Like my space var wouldn't work. You can put a underscore in between the my var and that would work, but you are not able to have a space between any variables. All right. All right, so let's have some more examples of variables. Remember that a few things that you must remember is that variables can be from A through Z, letters from A through Z, numbers from 0 through 9, and the only other, so let me just list that out. Variables could have numbers from 0 through 9. Variables can have And by the way, this hashtag in Python means comment, all right? Commenting means where if you run the code, if I run this, nothing will run because comments mean that that line will not be, Python will just skip over that line, not even reading it. But variables can have numbers from 0 through 9, letters from A through Z, and they can have hashtag, they can have underscore. That's the only thing they can have an and. And also, beginning of variable can only be letters or underscore, not any not numbers. All right, so keeping those in mind. Some examples of variable names include hello, that works. That's a variable name. Hello is a variable name. Hello underscore world is a variable name, right? It could be world underscore one, right? That's fine. World, word one also works, right? Word one works, but some examples that would not work include not variables, right? Some ones that are not examples of variables include one, hi, that wouldn't work, right? Hi, hello, world wouldn't work either. Hello, world wouldn't work either. You could not have a hello hashtag, that wouldn't work, right? You cannot have hello. You cannot have a hello exclamation mark, but you can have hello like that. That would work. Stuff like that. All right, and another thing about variables is variables store data. All right, variables store data. The data can be integers, they could be strings, they could be Booleans, they could be floating points, right? And how does it store the data? And what, after you make the variable name, right, you put an equal sign, right? After you put the equal sign, you could put any integers, you could put a string, right? You could put like a string, I don't know, like this would be a string, right? You could put a string, you could put an integer, you could put you can put a floating point, right? And the first one means that hello world is equal to 0.09. So whenever Python looks at, after you define the variable hello world, and that's equal to the 0.09, Python will always associate hello world with 0.09 and 0.09 with hello world. So it's just assigning 0.09 to hello world, 1 to world underscore 1, and string to word 1. All right, so that's basically variables. You make your variable name, and then you put an equal sign and whatever you want that variable to be equal to. So that's an overview about variables. Also, another thing to keep in mind is here are some more Python keywords. These are some common words that will be used in Python, and you cannot name your variables with any of these exact words in the exact way they are listed on the screen. You cannot use any of these as variable names. Just keep that in mind. All right, let's move on to the print function. So the print function is a built-in function that will print out variables or values. The print function is able to print out strings, integers, other values, including variables, floating point numbers, all that stuff. Example of a string, example of a string being printed out includes the ones listed below, and you can already see the basic structure of a print statement. You would type in print lowercase p, RINT, right? And then you have a parentheses, and the quotation marks is only for strings. If you want to print out an integer, you would just put the integer. You don't need the quotation mark, because if you put the quotation mark and then the integer, that would not be an integer, because remember, strings are the only ones with the quotation marks around them, okay? But integers, floating points, variables, they do not have the quotation mark around it. So only put the quotation mark if you want to print out a string. So if you want to print out a string, it'll be print, you'll put the parentheses, you'll put the quotation mark and whatever string you want. If it's an integer, you would just simply put print and then the parentheses, and then inside of the parentheses, you would put in whatever number you want to put, in whatever integer you want. And that's the same with floating points. You would simply just put print, the parentheses, inside the parentheses, you would put in that floating point number that you want. Some examples of variables, and then you print out the variable, are listed below. Remember, also for variables, it's the same as the integers and the floating points. Variables, you would simply just put print, the parentheses, and then inside the parentheses, you would just put the variable name. Like let's look below. A string variable. X is equal to the string hello world, and print X. And remember, you wouldn't put, although it's a string variable, although X is technically, X is equal to a string, you wouldn't put the quotation marks, because we're printing out the variable, we want to print out the variable with X, which is associated with the hello world. So you wouldn't need to put quotation marks. The second example, j is equal to 2, print out j in this format. All of them have the format, you put print and then the parentheses. If it's a string, you put in if you just want to simply print out a string, you put in the quotations and whatever you want to print out. If it's an integer, you put down the integer in the parentheses. If it's a floating point, put the floating point in the parentheses. And if it's a variable, put the variable in the parentheses. I'll give more examples. All right, so let's give some examples of printing stuff. All right, let's say we want to let's print out a string. So we want to print out a string. First, put in print, the keyword print of your parentheses. And since we want to print out a string, you would need quotation marks. All right, put the quotation marks, put whatever string you want, any string. You can put hello world, right? Hello world, that's a string, right? We can print out something else. We could also print out, let's say, Python, that's another string, right? And we'll print out one more thing. You put print, parentheses, since it's a string, you put quotation marks, let's say, by, right? And then you would run your function, you run your code, and you'll see it'll print out the hello world, Python, and by. That's for string. That's for a string. If you want to print out, I'll just leave those in there. If you want to print out an integer, let's comment those. But yeah, if you want to print out an integer, it would be like this. So print out integers, you would say print. Since it's no longer a string, you do not need a quotation mark. You just print out whatever integer you want, right? Remember, no decimals, because those, if you put a decimal, that would be a floating point number now. All right. So then, you have your strings, these are your integers, and now you want to print out a floating point. So if you want to print out a floating point, right, you would say print whatever floating point you want, and these floating points can have a decimal in them. Right now, so you got your strings. The first three are strings. The next three are integers, and the last two are going to be your floating point numbers. So another function that you can have with print is you are able to print multiple variables, integer strings together. You are able to do this by separating each with a comma. Like let's look below. We have a variable x, which is equal to the integer 10. So you can see print, you put print, and then you can see it's a string first, hi I am, and then the comma. This comma, what it does is it'll be able to combine together the hi I am string with the x, and the variable x is equal to 10, so it'll combine the string hi I am with the variable x, and then we'll combine the x with the string years old. Together, if you combine all of them together with the commas, it'll be hi, I am 10 years old. That's the same with the next one, name, which is equal to the string Billy. You are able to connect string to variable, meaning you connect the string hi, my name is to the variable name by this comma, and it'll make hi, my name is Billy. Give you a few more examples. All right, so I'll give you another example. Let's start off by making a variable named name. All right, the name will be John, okay? And let's say we also have another variable called, I don't know, city. What city is John in, right? And we'll have that a string, and we'll say Los Angeles. Let's say something else. Let's say Irvine. All right. And so if you want to combine those together, like I said, we would have to use a comma. So you'd say, all right, so we'll say, to make a complete sentence, we'll start by saying name, that's the variable, and we'll combine that with a string called lives in, right? And we'll combine that string with the other variable, city. If we combine the variable to string to another variable, that'll give you John lives in Irvine. And we can have something else like, we'll have, we'll just say integer is equal to, given integer, 80, right? And we'll say print, right? And we'll say a string. This is an example of then we'll have the comma, which will combine this string, this is an integer, to the variable integer. All right. And if we separate so we want to combine this string to the integer 80, and we'll do that with the comma in the middle. And when we run, it'll say, give me a sec. And remember, always put your, based off of this mistake, always make sure to spell your variable name correct, or else it will give you an error. Like I did, I spelled the variable that I put wrong, but if you do spell it right, it will give you the right example. This is an example of an integer 80. So that's an example of how you combine together different print statements with a comma. Okay, so that wraps up all of the stuff we will be learning today. So now we will be moving on to a few practice problems. So here's practice problem number 1. Make a variable for your name, your age, and one hobby of yours. Use the print function to print out your name, age, and hobby in the format listed below. Hello, my name is blank. I am blank years old, and one of my hobbies is blank. In those blanks, you would fill out, you would have the age, you would have your name, you would have a hobby, and you will make a variable for your age, your hobby, and your name, and fill it into those 3 blanks. Try to solve this on yourself. Pause the video, try to solve this on yourself, and when you're done solving, come back and see how I solve it to see if you did it correctly, and But if you do not understand how you do it, that's okay. You can just come back and watch how I do it. Here's the sample of output of how it should be. Hello, my name is John. I'm 22 years old, and one of my hobbies is playing basketball. That's what your code's output should kind of look like. It doesn't have to be exactly, but it should be something like this. All right. I hope you were able to solve it. So now let me show you how I would have solved it. So we have to create a variable for your name. So I will call that name, and any name will give a string name of, let's say, Paul. Right? We need a variable for age, and this will be an integer. We'll say he's 20, right? And then finally, we need a variable for hobby. Let's say Paul's hobby is the string running. He likes running. All right. So now we have to combine all three of these variables, name, age, and hobby together. So we'll print. We'll start off by saying hello, my name is, and we'll combine that with name, and then afterwards we will now combine I am, and we'll combine that to the age, which is the variable age, which is 20, and then we'll combine that with and one of my hobbies is, and we'll combine that with the final variable hobby. And when you put all of this together and you run it, it should say, hello, my name is Paul. I am 20. Oh, and in the name after the age, you could say, you could say years old. All right, so now if you run it again, okay, now, hello, my name is Paul. I'm 20 years old, and one of my hobbies is running. So we have three variables: name, age, hobby. You have your print, you have your parentheses around it. We combined the string hello, my name is to the variable name, which is assigned to the string Paul by a comma, and then we combine the name variable to another string I am, and we combine that to another variable age, and we combine that to a string, and that string is combined to another variable hobby. So you can see that commas can be used to combine together. Commas can be used to combine together different types of data. Like you could combine strings, variables, integers, etc. together using commas. All right, let's move on to practice problem number 2. Create a variable called my_number that contains the string 30. Change my_number into an integer and also a floating point number. Print out my_number as an integer and as a floating point number. Once again, try this on your own. See if you could do it by yourself. And pause the video, try to do it. And then when you're ready, come back and I will show you how I would do it. Hello, welcome back. I hope you were able to solve it. So now let me show you how I would solve the question. So we have to create a variable called my_number. We have to set that to the string of 30. Okay, and we have to print it out as an integer. So how would you do that? You would be able to do that here. There's multiple ways to do it. Here's one way. Say print, and one way to change from a string to an integer is like this. You put integer, int, parentheses, and the variable name, and in this case it would be my number, right? And this would change because my number right now is a string, because you could tell from these quotation marks. My number is a string. But by putting this int parentheses by number, it will change this it'll change this 30. So essentially what's happening is it'll change this 30 I'll change it into, it'll change this quotation 30 into the integer. So if you print this out, right, you'll print out that 30. So now we want to change it to a floating point. Same thing. Instead of int, you put f float. That'll change my underscore number into a float. All right, it will change this into this. It'll change it into this, and you can see that's what happens. First one's an integer. First one is changed to an integer. It changes my number to an integer. There's no decimal point, so it's an integer. It's a whole number. Second one is a float point because there are decimals. This is one way to do it. Another way to do it is you're also able to make another new variables for my number as an integer and my number as a floating point. So let's say my new integer is another variable. And what new integer will do is it will change my underscore number into a integer. So how would you do that? You would simply do the same thing as last time. You just put int, and then you put the parentheses, and then you put the my underscore number. Okay. You do the same thing if you want to change it to a float. Same thing. Create a variable to change my number into a float, right? And you, instead of integer, you put the f float. And then you put the original variable name of the string, my number. And you do this and you test it out. Oh yeah, and of course you have to say print new integer. You also have to say print new float. Oops. Also have to say print new underscore float. Okay. And you run it, and it'll print it as integer and a float. But besides that, since we already made it into variables, you are also able to combine and make it look nicer. You could say my underscore number as a integer. You got the comma to combine together. The string and the variable. Another string and my underscore number as a float is, and then you have your comma to combine together. And you have your variable that changed my number into a float. We do this, it'll say my underscore number as an integer is 30 and my underscore number as a float is 30.0. So that's how you do the second question. Let's move on. All right, here is the final practice problem. Create a variable that contains a string. Print out that string, that variable 5 times using only one print statement. Try to solve this on your own. Pause the video, try to solve it on your own. All right, so the final question it's asking us to make a variable, any variable. We'll call this variable string var. Okay, we'll call it string var. Var stands for variable, okay? And it could have any string in it, all right? We'll have a random string called underscore python underscore. And we'll have to print this 5 times. So we'll just say print, simply say print. We will have our variable name string var, and then we'll have our, I mentioned this in our previous slide, but one thing you can do with strings is you're able to repeat them multiple times, and you do this with a multiplication sign. I'm not sure if you remember that, but you're able to repeat strings with multiplication signs. And if you run this, it'll print out the Python 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And so you're able to do this. You're able to do this by this format. You're able to do this by having a multiplication sign and how many times you want to repeat it. Because this doesn't have to be 5. You could put 2, and it'll print string var 2 times. If you want it to be greater, you could say 10. You want it to print 10 times, it'll print string underscore var 10 times, right? And that's one thing. You don't even need to, yeah, that's one way. That's basically how you do this. But let's say if I didn't ask you to make a variable, you could just simply have a string. You could simply just say print, have like a random string, right? String. And then you could just say and then you have the multiplication sign. And let's say how many times you want to print it. Oh, we'll print it 8 times, right? And then if you do that, it'll print the string you put in. And what we put in as string, it'll print that 8 times. So that's how you do the second. And that is all that I have for you today. That's all the sample problems I had, and that is all of the different things that I had to do for you in this video. So now I will spend some time to recap the whole video. I will hopefully try to give you a few more problems, and yeah, I'll do a recap. All right, let's continue. Let's start this recap. So in Learn Python Part 1, we learned about different types of basic data types, such as integers, strings, Booleans, and floating points. All right. So remember that integers or int examples could be 1, 3, 5, 6, 90. Any whole numbers with no decimals are integers. Strings, okay, strings. Remember, strings, or also an str. And str will change it back into a string. Let's say we have an integer of x is a variable, and we'll set that into an integer of 1, and want to change that into a string, right? You just simply put str, and you'll put the variable name, and it will change that variable into a string. Now it's a string. And you're able to change it back if you want using int. But strings, remember, they can either be single or double quotations. They could either be single or there. Either is fine, okay? And examples could be words, right? It could be words like hello world, right? It could be numbers like 1, 2, 3. It could be numbers like 1, 2, 3. It could be random letters if you want, right? Or it could be like any characters. It doesn't matter, right? As long as you have the quotations around it, it will be a string. Remember, Booleans are either true or Booleans are either true or false. They are either true or false. Either be true or false. Okay. And finally, we have floating points. Floating points can be either floating points. Remember, they can be decimals. Floating points, or also known as float. They can be decimal. They are not whole numbers. They are decimals like this. Right, and those are basically all of that. We went over some stuff about printing. Remember, you can print multiple things together. You can print multiple things together, and you could do that by having your comma, right? You can have your comma, print multiple different things together, right? Like this, hello one, right? Hello, right? And remember, in order to have the print is, if it's a string, you would say print parentheses, and in the parentheses you would have your quotations in the string. If it's an integer, you would say print parentheses. In the parentheses, you will have the integer without the quotations. If it's a floating point, it will also be without the quotations, and variables will also be without the quotations. And remember the stuff about variables. Variables, they have to start with either letters or underscore, cannot start with numbers. Variables can only have these things in it. They can have letters from A through Z, numbers from 0 through 9, underscores. Those are only things that it can have. You can create a variable, and you could set that into equal to an integer, a floating point number, a string. Okay, and you can do that. You have to put the equal sign to show what you want to set it equal to, right? Let's show you want to set it equal to, right? These are all different examples of integers, strings, floating points. And yeah, that's basically all we went over today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look out for Learn Python Part 2, which will be coming soon. If you did enjoy this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Other than that, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.